Welcome back to another episode of the YA Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Keaton, and I'm excited for another episode of Season 2 of the YA Podcast. I'm excited because this episode is a special crossover episode with the Gathering Podcast and Alex Fisher. Me and Alex had this conversation several months ago for his podcast, The Gathering Podcast, that is a resource of the River Community Church in Cookeville, Tennessee. And our conversation was just so rich that I wanted to share it on our podcast platform as well. If you're looking for another resource or podcast to follow, then follow The Gathering. This podcast is specifically for the college ministry that's reaching Cookeville, Tennessee. And on this episode, me and Alex just talk about friendships and how friendship and just the relationship with another person is one so important for everybody, but especially young adults. The barriers that come in with that, and really how technology and being overly connected online can sometimes impact the way that we have true, deep, authentic relationships with one another. So I hope this conversation that me and Alex have today is helpful for you personally, but also as you're trying to unpack or understand how young adults are in this world of trying to have interpersonal relationships with another person and really that struggle that's happening in our world today. So I hope you enjoy this episode and this conversation between me and Alex Fisher.
So why young adults? Like, why do you care so much about, working with young adults?
Yeah, I think young adults are the most underconnected and underserved group in the local church today, especially across the state of Tennessee. Young adults, if you look at statistics, if you read any of the books, they're the group you look around and go, where are they? And most of the time, that question is asked because there's no connecting points for young adults in most of our local churches across the state. And so it's you graduate high school, we put so much emphasis on children and youth ministry, which is great, and we need to. But when you turn 18 and you graduate and you either go off to college or you stay at home, the church that you maybe grew up in, you realize, you look around and you're like, there's maybe not a place for me anymore. Yeah. There's been so much focus, there's been so much attention. And this isn't necessarily a consumeristic point of view of like, you're not feeding me, but it's just, there's no landing point, right? You go from having specific age graded groups for you to, hey, you got to jump in with your mom and dad now in small group. And it's just different life stage and different application of stuff. And it changes, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. And it's, man, I think one of the big things that drew me here, because obviously I work with young adults too, and is, man, how strategic of a group this is. Yeah. Because they are, like we were talking about earlier today, they are looking for answers to deep, real questions. Surface level answers don't work for them. And they're passionate about actually knowing who is God really, what does His Word actually say, how can we actually live for Him, and maybe some of the reason they're underserved in many churches is because those are hard questions to answer. But thankful for what you do at the board, state board, and helping churches be more equipped to minister to them. One thing we talked about too is it's a very easy for this age group to feel isolated. Yeah, feel lonely. Sure. And so what I wanted to talk to Ryan about today was friendship in this stage of life being like 18 to 25. Like a lot of times in high school, you are kind of naturally in situations where it's easier to make friends. Not that maybe you were really lonely in high school and that was not your experience, but I think just for a lot of people, there's like you're in school, you're in class, or you've got your youth group or something, and like friends are kind of all around you and kind of given to you. But when you get to college or when you get to the workforce or something, it can be a little bit harder to develop friendships and to begin to feel like you're on an island all by yourself. And so just wanted to have a conversation about what is friendship, how do we develop good, healthy friendships? What does a good friend even look like? How can we be better friends? And really seek those relationships out. So what would you consider to be maybe some markers of what a good friendship looks like?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. And in our age of connectivity, right, we're connected to so many people. We have 2,000 Facebook friends or followers on Instagram or TikTok, or whatever it may be. And so I think a true, authentic friendship, like that definition, is starting to kind of fall by the wayside, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It almost becomes like a fairy tale. Like, well, I hear about friendships, but I've never really experienced it.
Would love to have one day.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, we're connected to so many people, but how many people can we truly count on? Mm-hmm. And so I would say some markers would definitely be like trust and time.
Yeah.
Some people, you're around for a long time and you build that trust with them. And so your relational equity, if you will, you build that up with them, right? You can trust, if I have this conversation, if I'm vulnerable, if I'm transparent, they can handle it. And so there's some, I think, levels of friendship that, I mean, it just takes time to build.
Right.
But I mean, there are some people you just kind of connect with automatically. Maybe it's life experience or life stage that you're in, and it's just personality. And so you get a lot of relational equity dumped in the bucket real quick, and so you just really connect with somebody. So I think but I would say time and trust are two markers that I really think of when I think of friendship.
So I love that you brought up the connectivity piece, because we are the most connected society ever as far as quantity of connections, but it seems like we're one of the most isolated societies ever when it comes to true, authentic relationships and friendships. And so why do you think it's even important to pursue actual friendship with a human being instead of just relying on the surface level, potentially thousands of friendships that we have online, whether it's through Instagram or Facebook or whatever? Why is it so important? What do you even maybe miss if you don't pursue friendship, on a face-to-face human being authentic level?
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned quantity, and there is the difference, I think, between quantity and quality of friendships, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of people who follow me on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but they're not going to be there if a loved one passes away or if I'm having a bad day, or, we all need somebody to call us out sometimes to help us get out of that funk. And so when you are just in digital relationships, you miss out on that face-to-face interaction of just having somebody live life with you. We were created to be together. I mean, whether you believe in God or the Bible or not, I mean, that's the whole point of how God created us, was to be in first relationship with Him, but then to be in relationship with one another.
Yeah.
And while you can have digital relationships, there's nothing that can truly replace a face-to-face interaction with somebody. Mm-hmm. Just that warmth of being in the same room, of living life together. I mean, talking about the time, I have friends who I've grown up with my whole life who I still talk to on the phone, and we'll do things monthly or bi-monthly together, and I would consider them some of my best friends. But there are certain things about my job or my life they don't understand. And so because I don't live daily with them, there's just certain burdens they can't help me carry.
Sure.
But then there's other people who are in that stage of life with me today who see the daily grind I'm trying to go through. And there's just a different level of relationship. There's almost that seasonal aspect of friendship.
Yeah, for sure.
That I think sometimes we may view as a bad thing, but I think is a good thing. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. And so I can't expect all of my relationships to be the exact same as they were.
Yeah, the seasonal aspect is something I observe to be a huge challenge for, especially for the transient stage of life that many young adults live in, because they come from high school, maybe having been friends with the same people since maybe middle school or elementary school. Yeah. And now all of a sudden they move 2 hours away to Tennessee Tech or UT Knoxville or something, and they oftentimes, if they can't begin to develop friendships where they are right then, they kind of continue to live in the past of almost like it's high school 2.0 instead of planting where they are now. Not at the detriment of friendships back home necessarily, but it is healthy, I think, to understand, okay, in the stage of life where I'm at right now, in the location that I'm at geographically right now, what does it look like to develop real friendships right around me? Yeah. I remember my first semester of college. I had some great friends back home. They're still awesome friends of mine. And I realized very quickly that it was going to be hard to maintain the same level of friendship that I had with them from a time perspective. Yeah. Because now I'm an hour and a half away. And there was a season that was beginning to shift there for me. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of freshmen, especially, who like they're going home every single weekend to the high school football games, and they're like doing the whole thing like they're still in high school. And it's like, nah, man, like that was a season that was great. Remember that season for what it was. This is a new season now, and the new season brings new relationships, it brings new friends, it brings new connections and new challenges that maybe people from your past season might not understand. And that maybe even has a connection to like someone who comes to faith in Jesus for the first time, and they're now in a totally different season, and having friends who can help walk with them in that would be absolutely critical as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, you go away to college. I know, I mean, I don't know if you call it an identity crisis or what it may be, but I mean, I had in my undergrad, when I was working for my bachelor's, one guy I'd grown up with. So I at least had him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I didn't have that same crew that I'd grown up with my whole life. And then I look around and I'm like, you know, I have a lot of people who I hang out with and play basketball with, or, you know, disc golf or whatever it may be. But like, do they really care about me? We don't have those inside jokes. We don't have, and that time hadn't been there yet, right?
Yeah. It takes time.
Yeah,
sure
it does.
Time.
And I mean, you can almost have that, like, who am I? Mm-hmm. But that's, I think, the beautiful thing about this life stage of 18 to 25 is we're completely changing who we are, but we're kind of for the first time maybe getting to decide, who do I want to be?
Yeah.
Do I want to be this same person that I was? It gives us an opportunity to kind of tweak our lives. And, you know, I maybe had some character flaws that I don't want to carry on into my adult life.
Sure. That
some friends didn't let me, you know, stretch my wings and fly in this area. They kind of held me down. I've heard it said, you're going to be the average of the 5 people you put around you. You might not be the best, you might not be the worst, but chances are you'll fall right in the middle. And I think that's so true in friendship, too. And it's important of what friends we allow to be around us.
Right.
Hopefully we have people who are encouraging us, who are making us better, because if not, I mean, if you look around to the people around you, do you want to be the average of those people that you're hanging out with?
Right.
Sometimes the answer is, of course, and sometimes it's like, well, maybe not.
Maybe, yeah. I'd be lucky to be the best.
Yeah.
So that's right, yeah.
That's right.
So let's say someone's listening to this and like, okay, I get it. Friendship's important, but, you know, I feel totally isolated right now, and I don't even know where to start, you know? And, I mean, I think as someone in that position, they're struggling with a lot of different things, from loneliness to potentially depression, and this idea of, man, nobody cares about me. You know, what would you say to that person who feels like they're just on the fringe of life and missing what we're talking about here with friendship?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is just identifying the issue, because, I mean, you can't confront something that you're not aware of, and you're not alone in it. So, I mean, part of our loneliness or our depression or anxiety, whatever, is, whether it's Satan or however you want to identify it, tries to convince us, maybe we try to convince ourselves, that we're the only person that's ever experienced this, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, everybody 18 to 25 is going through the same life stage that we are. It may be different location, it may be different to some degree, but I mean, everybody is in a new season of life, whether it's trying to figure out a career or trying to study for. So, I mean, you're not alone in it.
Right.
You're not alone in this transition of trying to find new places to land, trying to figure out who you are. And so, as much of a unicorn as you may feel like you are, it's normal to go through those things. And so just realizing, okay, I'm not a freak, right? Like other people have experienced these same difficulties I'm going through. So I'm not alone in that. And so it helps, right? Like it helps you see, if I'm going through this and another person's going through this, like, be a friend worth having. Chances are, if I reach out to somebody, they're trying to find a friend too. Yeah. And, but then also, like, really leaning into, while you may feel lonely now, like, don't isolate and lean into the loneliness, lean into community and trying to be a friend. The U.S. Surgeon General came out with a report, and you could go to Table for One Ministries website and get some of these statistics, but the U.S. Surgeon General said that loneliness has the same effect on your health as smoking cigarettes. It negatively impacts us. I mean, like I said, we were created to be in community. And so we saw that through COVID and isolation, people being at home, not being able to be in community, and just people's physical health, yes, through maybe a virus, but even more so, I think, just through poor eating habits, poor exercise habits, lack of accountability, lack of movement, whatever it may be. physical health just took a huge detriment turn. And so,
and that lack of community, because even like I think about, we've got, a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old, and we FaceTime my parents all the time.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun, and it's way better than a phone call.
Yeah.
Like getting to see their face, and they're getting to see the kids, and it's a lot of fun. But even that, as good as it is, it's not even close to a substitute of real in-person interaction. Yeah. And unfortunately, we substituted in-person interaction for a Zoom call for quite a while, and for many of us during a very formative time too. So I loved what you said about be a friend worth having, because that is sometimes, I think, if we're not careful, we develop the victim mentality when it comes to friendship. And listen, you might be listening to this and you were totally like treated terrible by friends you had in a past life, and you felt it was very unfair what happened to you. And I'm not at all minimizing that. Yeah. But at the same time, at some point, we have to look in the mirror and say, if this is going to change, I need to do something about it.
For sure.
One thing I hear a lot from people, and maybe we can get into this some, is this hatred towards cliques and feeling isolated. And listen, I don't want to ever form a clique or any type of like closed off group. But sometimes if we allow ourselves to, we'll get in our head of like, oh man, I wasn't invited to this thing. So like, I don't know if I'm really liked, and then I don't have any friends. And it kind of like your own head becomes like an echo chamber for these things. And you develop this victimization mentality of, oh, like all of this is happening to me. It's like, that's possible. But even if it is happening to you, is that really how you want to live? Like at some point we have to take the ownership on ourselves and say, I'm going to do the necessary steps to being a friend worth having, and maybe reaching out to someone who's not being reached out to just like me, and we can form a friendship that way. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, I can speak personally, one specific situation, and I won't get into all the details on this, but I had a friend who just made a horrible mistake that directly impacted me, and it radically, I mean, it shook me, right? That moment or that incident could have, and it does to some degree, impact the way that I trust people, the way that I view friendship. And so it'd have been very easy in that stage to be the victim, right? Of like, this person really hurt me, hurt a lot of others around me, and so it's just not worth it. Yeah. It's not worth being vulnerable, so I'm just going to put those walls up and not let anybody else in, which is an option that I think a lot of people choose.
Sure.
But in that kind of idea of being a friend worth having, the other side of it is, I know the pain of having somebody let me down or hurt me or whatever. And so I never want to make somebody else feel that way when they come in contact with me.
Yeah.
So while I may not have experienced the best, I want when other people come in contact with me for them to have the best experience with me possible.
That's a great way of putting it.
And most of the time, you attract what you are. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But if I'm negative, it's not hard for me to find other people who are willing to get down and be negative with me, right?
Right.
But the more I found myself trying to be positive and encouraging, I found that attracts positive, encouraging people around me. And then the ones who won't be, they weed themselves out, right? Because that's not the world they want to live in. And it's not that you cut them off, but they just stop answering the phone. Yeah. And that's not always a bad thing.
Yeah.
So
that's good. Yeah. We can't allow the failures of past relationships or past friendships to define the future of what's possible when it comes to friendship, for sure.
Yeah.
So you got, a 20-year-old who's feeling lonely. A good step is to be a friend worth having.
For sure.
A good step is to reach out to those and make sure, even if you have been treated poorly, that the people who interact with you are treated better than you were. That is worth a podcast right there. Yeah, that is right good there. Stuff. And I think it's because it puts, a lot of times we want to control their actions and emotions of other people. Yeah. And you just can't do that. The only person you can control is you. Yeah. And so we can sit around and, wallow in our own self-pity about how people treated us, and that could be totally right and deserved. Or we can say, okay, you know what, like, yes, this happened, but I'm going to make sure that people who interact with me, that does not happen to them.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm going to be a friend worth having. And over time, like, I'm with you. I think that does attract the kind of friends you want to be around. Bria's grandma who is the nicest person ever. She has this phrase, whenever someone does something mean to her, she says, I'm just going to kill them with kindness.
Yeah.
And sometimes she'll kind of say it through her teeth, but sometimes it's what you got to do. Like if you've been treated poorly, like you can get down in the gutter with them, or you can rise above it and kill them with kindness, which you could argue maybe has some Jesus tones there, like turning the other cheek and like loving your enemy. I don't know if Jesus would have said kill them with kindness, but it does ring true that, if Jesus has forgiven us, then we can forgive those who have hurt us. And what he's offering us is really an invitation into not just a relationship with him, but a relationship with his people who, yes, are imperfect, but are really the thing that unifies that is the blood of Jesus. And that's a community we can definitely be a part of. Yeah. What would you say to someone who's maybe been a part of a Christian community in the past and has been hurt by that community? What are some steps forward for them? Because that's something I think we encounter, unfortunately, all too often in our college ministry here is there's a student who maybe was a part of a church in high school and witnessed or was directly affected by whether it might be a church split or gossip or something that does not define what a community of Jesus should be about, but it was their experience of it. What kind of advice would you give somebody like that who's maybe very gun-shy about starting to get involved in community with Christians?
Well, the first thing I would just say is, I'm sorry that was your experience. Sadly, there's so many that have walked through that, and the last thing I want to do is minimize somebody's personal experience. Yeah, because that's very isolating, right? When you're just like, they're just playing the victim, they're just playing a big deal. Like I've had some of the, and I mean, I'm just being transparent for your podcast. Some of the wildest, most inappropriate things I've had said to me were from people who claim to be Christ followers. Yeah, and so, I'm sorry that happened to you. But I'll just say that just because they claim to be Christ followers doesn't mean that they necessarily reflect the character of Christ. Sure. And so, like any family, there's going to be the oddballs, right?
Yeah, or
and
the dysfunction.
The dysfunction that's going to happen. And so don't let an earthly relationship or person be how you define your heavenly Father. Yeah. Because, he doesn't look at you the way that maybe somebody has communicated. And I'll say a big movement that is happening among young adults is this deconstruction. And I'll say in that, if that is something you're walking through where you're trying to kind of tear down to the bedrock of what you believe, I think the deconstruction movement has been mislabeled. Because I think, honestly, it's more of a not deconstruction, but a destroying movement where they're trying to destroy faith. So I'll say if you're deconstructing, leave something to build back on. Yeah. Don't give up on God. Don't give up on a chance to have a relationship with him, because if you're not, then you're not deconstructing your faith. You're destroying your faith. There's a difference in those two. I think that there is a benefit to tearing down and saying, why do I believe what I believe in? And then building that back on a foundation of Jesus. You need that. You need to strip away the weight of religion to some degree. And I think that a poor church experience would probably fall into that religion category over the relation category. And then I'll say, there are good churches out there. 100%. You may have had bad church experiences. I've had bad church experiences, but I promise you, somewhere there is a great Bible-believing church of loving Christians who want to pour into you. So don't give up on trying to find that. That's not the fairy tale. True Christ followers exuberate the love of Christ. And so that is out there. Healthy community is out there. So just because you've experienced the poor doesn't mean you won't ever find the healthy.
Yeah, that's a good word. And you can say that because you travel. Part of what you do is going to all these churches in Tennessee. Yeah. And so you experience all different types of churches. And so the fact that you can say, hey, they are out there, and they're often not, there's not as few as we think there are. There's actually there's a lot of churches that are just extremely healthy and loving and kind and not perfect. You'll never find a perfect one, but ones that really do seek to share the love of Jesus with young adults and really all people, regardless of, nationality or socioeconomic or whatever it might be. They do exist. And one thing I was thinking about as you were talking was I've been reading Jeremiah recently, and he was an extremely isolated prophet because everybody hated him. Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, he wasn't the most encouraging either. But if you don't know about the prophet Jeremiah, I mean, he really is a lot of judgment to Judah and Israel for their sin. And you can just tell like the isolation he was feeling in several passages. But something he always comes back to is that ultimately God is enough for him, that serving God is worth it, and God will see him through it. And God does call us to community, absolutely. So don't use this as an excuse to not jump into community, but God will sustain you on that journey to finding community. He will keep you. I think sometimes we rely on people to be for us where only God can be.
Yeah.
And so just stay consistent in your relationship with him and keep searching for that community with intentionality, and you really will find it. That's for sure.
And if you've taken any counseling or psychology classes or whatever, you may have heard this phrase, but hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is probably those people in the church who are supposed to be like Christ who weren't and who hurt you, they probably had some underlying issues in their life as well. And they were acting out of their own hurt when they hurt you. They may not have even been intentionally trying to hurt you. Maybe they were.
Yeah.
But either way, chances are they were going through their own stuff just like you are. And maybe they were trying to seek community, and they were venting out their frustration in a poor way.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's easy to just lay down and give up. It's a lot harder to say, you know what, that situation really stunk, but I'm going to try to move forward and make other situations better.
That's good. Yeah. Well, I got one more question for you.
Okay, let's do it.
What would you consider to be some of the biggest barriers to friendship right now that people have to overcome?
For sure. So time is one. I mean, we talked about time and trust. We're busy. We live in a very busy world, maybe busier than ever before. If you look at my calendar, if you look at your calendar, it's probably jam-packed with things. And so I would say, just like your relationship with Jesus doesn't happen by accident, biblical community doesn't happen by accident. It's something, if it's not on your calendar, it's not going to happen. And so you have to be intentional to put it on there. So maybe you need to intentionally schedule friendship, which sounds crazy, but you need it. And so if you're not going to plan it, it's not going to happen. And so time is a huge barrier, and intentionality is a huge barrier. We're just not being intentional in friendships anymore because life is taking us in so many different directions with jobs or college or whatever. I think over 70% of college students work. And so you're busy, right? You're trying to keep family relationships, home friend relationships, college relationships, work. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And so just managing your time well. And then I would just say, especially as a Christ follower, not seeking biblical community is a big barrier, because we try to replace what can only be found in relationship with other believers with things of the world, and it can never sustain or fulfill the same way.
Yeah.
And so if you are a believer, don't neglect how important it is to have other believers around you in community. You're supposed to be in the world. You're supposed to be evangelistic to those around you, of course, but you need people to hold you accountable who have like-mindedness, who are going to encourage you. And so don't neglect biblical community, especially if you're a believer.
Well, I hope that conversation was helpful for you. I know for me, it was just great to be able to unpack all of the details and the things that come with just being a friend. And I hope that you go out after listening to this and you think, how can I be a better friend worth having? How can I invest and pour into other people? And how can I start leaning into having friendships, maybe even across intergenerational lines? If you're a young adult, how can you have mentors above you who can pour into your life and all of the rich history and life experience that they have? How can you start pouring into the younger generation and handing off the baton well? And if you are in the older generations, how can you understand the values of young adults and why they find those important, but then also instill your values and your thoughts and your desires into them as well? And just how important it is to not only have mentorships, but to have true biblical friendships. If you've not done so, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because you are our best advertising when it comes to this podcast. Thank you so much for your gifts through the cooperative program, because without your giving, resources like this podcast would not be possible. We still have a few episodes left in this season, so be on the lookout as we release other episodes and as we have different talks. Until we see you again and meet again on this podcast, go and win Tennessee for Jesus. We'll see you next time. Bye.